this is a basic purpose and an intention of our Free Radical podcast, to have deep conversations, to have vulnerable moments of sincere introspection and empathy, while addressing in a compassionate way, but also in a committed way, those situations, those patterns, and those ways of thinking that may be getting in the way of us properly being proper spiritual practitioners, proper sadhakas, proper human beings.
We had this noble onset where we said, okay, let's try. We have faith in our starting point promise that it will work. But now we have to look into the issue and say, really, it doesn't work for most of us, right? And it's not just because we're all aparadis, we're all non-aparadis. That's another topic. No, okay?
When I think of the word crafting, I think of more like taking the responsibility to see how bhakti is unfolding in our life and respond to that, instead of trying to respond to like the imposition of the way things should be, as maybe spoken to us by, like, let's say like an institutional or communal protocol that bhakti should be like this or look in this way.
So the question is, should we be having devotees take vows that they can't keep, or there's a good chance that they're not going to be able to keep,
and they will fake that they are continuing keeping it because the status quo is like, you have to do this in order to be a devotee. That's, for me, you are not part, you cannot belong. And of course, all of us want to belong, but they end up not belonging, but forcing themselves to fit in by faking, by cheating themselves and others, which is the opposite of what we are supposed to be doing. Yeah, I personally, I'm of the idea, of course, not everyone may agree with me, but that one should accept vows in a very individual way that one can sustain. Whenever one is accepting a guru and taking initiation on one commitment or another, there shouldn't be just one single universal formula that everyone is expected to follow in the exact same way, because not everyone is in the exact same person in the exact same stage.
It's become, unfortunately, a very common unwritten rule in the householder ashram is, do whatever you want, but just don't get caught. Because if you get caught, it's bad news for the church, for the temple, for the institutions.
The way in which this presentation of how seva will save you actually co-opts the way that a sadhaka develops. And so there's a need that I've seen and others have seen that I've discussed with, to let people come in and not practice Krishna consciousness, but be a part of the Bhakti Sangha. And to understand that right now what you're doing is just becoming a normal human being in a basic sense.
Some of the dangers of just becoming a monk, as long as I'm doing my meditation, I'm good, Yeah. And that can be the danger. And I remember Brother Wayne saying to me, now you've gotten your meditation in your life. Now you have to get your life into your meditation. So that everything else becomes a kind of reflection of our spiritual journeys, so that everything that happens in our life can always reflect back to us, what God is, where we are, what we're working on, what God is asking of us, and how we can best kind of move forward in this journey, in the depths of our spiritual journey, whatever it is. I mentioned to you before we started this podcast today, getting bit by a rattlesnake earlier this week. Which,
you have to integrate that into your spiritual practice also. Actually, there are no bad emotions. There are only bad things we do with our emotions. And that calls for more responsibility, actually, because it's easy to say, those are the bad emotions, so you avoid them. No, they're bad. Be careful of them. And instead of saying, no emotion is bad, but you have responsibility on how you embrace each emotion. So that's more challenging. It demands more responsibility, but that invites for more growth and progress also.
Yeah, and then to see the emotions as signals or signs, like, oh, this is a signal for me to pay attention. There's something important here. What's going on?
The narrative may be sometimes, you cannot trust your own personal experience. You are a conditioned soul. You have these 4 imperfections, so you have to receive sabda, you have to receive revealed knowledge. But the point is, even in the context of receiving revealed knowledge, that's being filtered through your own personal experience of that. So we cannot, technically speaking, ontologically speaking, we cannot escape from having our personal experience of anything. Yeah. So I cannot trust something that I cannot escape. So that will create such a short circuiting in someone who chooses to think like that.
All these guys they don't believe in the self-effulgent acharya, they don't believe in the gurus. No, I believe in all of that, but I'm also trusting what my eyes are seeing, not only in my own sanghas, but in sanghas across the board. Especially when you say in India, you see all sorts of wild stuff, or you hear about all sorts of wild things. So it's like, okay, if I have to trust, I do trust my vision. You know, I'm not a full adult yet, you know, to be honest, but I'm adult enough to trust my own vision when I'm seeing it. And I'm like, okay, there probably needs to be some adapting here if this is going to be a healthier, sustainable thing.
I encourage everyone to create what they want, and create that freshness that they want, and to experience to have the freedom to trust oneself and to give oneself that space and to cultivate it with others. Like safety, confidentiality, being vulnerable, being on the growth edge, being alive.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally resonate with the idea of how all of our main spiritual practices have to do with what we talked today with transformative communication. Shravanam, learning to hear. Kirtanam has to do not only with singing, but also speaking. Sadhu Sangha is so crucial for us, but without transformative communication, we cannot talk about Sadhu Sangha. Even if we want to talk about our 4 regulative principles, they have so much to do with transformative communication. Austerity of speech, speech that is truthful and beneficial, truthfulness being one of the principles, ahimsa, non-violence in our speech, non-violent communication, the need for our human grounding and foundation, and how much many times that's neglected in the name of transcendence. And like if humanity is something that goes against transcendence, and like if our own idea of transcendence doesn't include humanity, which is a huge mistake, because our idea of transcendence is Nara Lila, and that's fully human and fully divine. So we have to be grounded in humanness to begin with.
That's, you hear that a lot too. I don't want to feel anything for my wife, because then I'll be too attached. And no, we need to, the only way out is through. We need to be attached in the Grihastha ashram. And if you have Krishna in the center of your ashram, then that attachment will be very, very favorable.
Totally agree. A verse that comes to mind is in Canto chapter 25, verse 20. It says, Prashangam ajaram pasham atmana kavayo bidhu saiba sadhu sukrito moksha dwaram apabritam, which basically plays with the word of sangam, or attachment, and says like every person knows that attachment for the material is the greatest entanglement, but that same attachment, what applies to a sadhu or to a devotee, opens the door for realization. Attachment from an exploitative, selfish place, that's unhealthy. But there is a place to be attached and to a devotee, and attached to a devotee doesn't mean only attached to your guru, attached to your senior temple president or whatever.
Relationships, I think, are often framed, perhaps because of our own whatever baggage that we're bringing, as something that is counterproductive to that internal world that we're doing, or that detracts or takes you away from, or something that you need to do as a necessary evil to get back to the internal thing that you were doing. But I think with the definition that you presented, it's a necessary component in the completion of those studies, in the expression of that devotion. Like, you need somewhere to practice whatever it is what's happening in here. There's an arena where that needs to take place, and that's actually what makes it whole. That's how you come back to center. And then from whatever you have out there in relationships, you bring that in as new kind of grist for the mill, more information, more data, more input to do the internal work.
So dialogue, the very etymology of the word, comes from two interacting logoi, dialogo. Logoi means word. So two words so to say, interacting with one another, which means like a crossing from our world into another world, into the world of the other, for the sake of sharing experience. That's a big adventure, real dialogue, for the sake of mutual understanding, for the sake of empathy, of mutual trust. That's dialogue. That's the type of dialogue we want to foster throughout this project. The goal of life is not God, is love for God. And God's own life, God has also his goal in life, which is also divine love. No, I mean, both God and us share the same goal in life. Sorry, Leah, what?
I said I might be Hindu. I'm not sure. I think I totally agree everything you're saying.
Many times I hear you and I say I must be Christian. So we are on the same page in that connection.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Yeah, for me, that's a really reconciling idea. The same thing that is the goal of life for us is the goal of life for God, because that thing that is the goal, which is love, again, is ever evolving, ever unfolding. So you can never fully grasp and capture, okay, I got my goal of life. It's always 2 steps ahead, so to say.
Yeah, I put it this way: every end is a new beginning, and every arrival a new departure.
Voluntary offering should come from a place of so much commitment and fascination with what we have received as a gift, that will be given voluntarily even more than if we will be paid. But
that's the key. I think that's the key.
It's not always happening like that.
No, I think that's quite rare. Actually, not rare, but I think it's a really, really nice when we see that. But to give that extra because you feel like you're getting so much. I mean,
that's
you're lucky. Yeah. You're really lucky if you're feeling that.
Yeah, and we should be feeling that because we are receiving so much. No,
right. Yeah.
No, not like putting pressure on anyone. You should be feeling like that because we're receiving too much. But for this to be a natural exchange, I think we should somehow get to that position. We should, the motivation for our daily practice should be always that.
Totally.
Comes to mind one quote by my dear Thomas Merton. He once will say, I can maintain myself in my spiritual life because of the prayers of my brothers and sisters. So that came from a very deep, genuine place of humility. If I'm still here with you, it's because of the prayers of so many of you. So thank you for that.
Intercessory prayer of the saints is keeping the world on its axis. Yeah, it's like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He would say that the Gaudiya Math and the whole mission of Mahaprabhu is expanding because of what? The epicenter of power by which it's expanding is the Nam Bhajan of Srila Gaur Kishore Das Baba, hidden in the toilet. When he's hiding in the public latrine, the lady came to clean afterwards. I heard this story. She came to clean after he finally left and went somewhere else, another tree, under a boat somewhere. And she said even the bricks in the latrine were still chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna. He had melted the heart of the minerals that make up the bricks. And Srila Saraswati Thakur said that the whole mission was expanding because of him, because of that. Now, is that just like him glorifying his Gurudev and like shifting the credit to his Gurudev? Or is he giving us a mystical insight to reality?
In some sense, where we all become monks, as you describe it in the first line in your book on radical monasticism, that, we're inventively expressing our own nature and vocation in the context of intimate fellowship. And that this doesn't stop at the borders of our traditions in any way whatsoever, but it's a calling for all of us as human beings with each other. And that, the flourishing and what could emerge out of that, I think, we're not sure, but it's one of the things I think is necessary to lead us into a transformed world.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing.
From a very old structure since thousands of years, not being part of the group meant death. When you were like living in a forest, in a little tribe, when you were excommunicated. And for hundreds and hundreds of years in the Catholic Church, excommunication meant death. Meant, and not just a physical death, but actually it meant ontological death. You're like doomed as a soul.
Yeah, I can empathize with your words. I have some experience in that.
see that naivety, that it's a codependence. People recognize their life as a mess, and we come in with the magic wand solution of devotional service, Krishna consciousness, and a temple that needs a lot of help. And so for 2-3 years, people live in that. But then afterwards, they start to recognize that their needs still aren't being met. And maybe they're being taken advantage of. And then they go elsewhere.
But Krishna is saying in the Gita, a saintly person for me is not necessarily someone perfect or impeccable, but it may be a mess, but an acknowledged mess, so to say.
and you just brought out also about mercy. It's the absolute mercy that can be appreciated when we are a mess and things still happen, and we're still unconditionally loved. And if everything is perfect, then where is the space for God to show his absolute compassion and love for us?
But this emphasis on you have to be purified also sends the subtle message, or sometimes not even so subtle, that if you are not purified enough, Krishna doesn't love you, or you are not being accepted by God. So you need to deserve, you have to earn God's love by way of your purification. It's all up on you, basically. It's all on your shoulders, your effort, your sacrifice, some sort of meritocracy. No, the more you are purified, the more Krishna will like you. But like you are now, he doesn't like you that much. So you need to purify so much. And that creates an idea of Krishna, which is totally a-Krishna. No, it's not. That's not God. That's not the God I worship, at least. A God of unconditional love and mercy. But we are so ungenerous with ourselves in terms of how God is looking to us. No, like Saint John of the Cross will say, try to love what God sees in you. He's seeing something in you which he finds lovable, which he finds worthy of his unconditional grace. Try to love that in yourself. That won't be a source of pride. That will be a source of deep humility. But sometimes that's a high price to pay. No, I mean, to receive unconditional love, we need to be extremely humble, because we have to acknowledge I'm receiving something that no matter what I do, I will never deserve in one sense. It's an undeserved gift, but I need it so much. And it's so beautiful, and it's coming in such a generous way. One of the things that come to mind regarding to sexuality and why we may be afraid of talking about that, because also in its roots, sexuality has a lot to do with being naked, and not only physically, but real sexuality has to do with nakedness and vulnerability, and being totally naked and vulnerable and open to each other. And most of us escape that. Most of us escape intimacy. Many times those unresolved issues may take the form of sexual expression toward other person, but in a totally unresolved place. So you objectify the person, you exploit the person, you are aggressive, you are not sensitive enough, and so on and so forth. So that's not, of course, the sacred sexuality we have been talking about.
Exactly.
Sometimes people would say, okay, you are talking about having easy sex or something, but what we are talking is, no, this is the most challenging and difficult way of having sex, because it entails you have to deal with your own stuff, to heal your heart, to go to the shed and find all the unconscious for properly proper intimacy to be happening. So that's way more challenging. That's not cheap. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm thinking about the very meaning of the word monk, that basically the implications of monk is something that someone who is going into himself, so to say, no? Like going into the inner chamber, no, embracing introspection and depth of thought, and as you mentioned, commitment to spiritual discipline as the all in one's life. And again, that doesn't have to be limited to a particular order. In potential, everyone can do that. And of course, if we overemphasize that only monastics have the potential, classical monastics are the one doing that thing, that it's dangerous in itself, because you can just think, okay, now I'm a monastic, so it means that by being a monastic, and necessarily I'm doing that thing, and not necessarily you can be a monastic and even using monasticism as a spiritual bypassing. But love is the most powerful and most transforming thing of also, we could say that's the thing we are most terrified about as well, even if we don't know that consciously.
Yes.
We are running after that, but we are running away from that simultaneously.
I agree. I think we so desire love, but we fear the cost of love. In other words, love at its height, it's totally self-involving, right? It's completely kenotic. You have to empty yourself completely into another for the sake of the other.
Yeah.
And we like the lower stages of love where kind of, we feel good about, being loved and loving. And that's not a bad thing. It's certainly the start. But real love is real fire, quite honestly.
Yeah. As I like to say, real love is not a dopamine peak, but actually self-forgetfulness and allowing yourself to be transformed by your openness to the other person.
Devotees gave the groom a present, and it was a bucket, a flashlight, and a rope. So you're entering the deep, dark well. So you need, these are the things you need.
I was wondering why that gift. Now it was, unfortunately, was clear. Oh my gosh. So still we have some remnants. Yeah, and just to clarify, because this expression, the dark well, deep dark well of family life, that's in the Bhagavatam, but it's not referring to Grihastha ashram.
Exactly.
No, it's referring to a married life, but which is totally selfish, exploitative, full of ulterior motives and separate agenda. So that's the deep dark well of family life. That's not Grihastha ashram. A devotee is supposed to enter Grihastha, as we say, ashram. The nature of love is that if I love someone, I will love everything in connection to that someone.
Yes.
And if I love God, I will have to love everything else, because it happens that everything else is in connection with Him.
Yes.
So there's no escape. It's beautifully capturing. We cannot escape from such an idea. But again, we fail so miserably sometimes on that simple truth, but of course, sometimes so challenging, no? Learning. Sorry.
I wonder if I could offer an observation just on what I'm feeling, and I sense in you as well as we're having this conversation, because
yes, please.
You and I both know that these failures in exactly this area that we're talking about, these failures have resulted in incredible suffering and terrible harm and horrible, unacceptable, infuriating hypocrisy. And yet I notice that as you and I are talking, we feel not to the exclusion of that sadness, we also feel joy. And I think this is something I'm just observing, that I think it's a relief for people to acknowledge what we're trying to acknowledge, because I think on some level, people realize that there's something really wrong with the way so many of our religious communities are functioning. And the relief and the joy of seeing, like when I heard you tell that story from your tradition about worshiping God at the altar and then betraying it in the way we treat people, I just think, yes, that's so true. And joy comes, I think, when we acknowledge that reality. So
even if it may be painful to acknowledge some of those things, still there is a deeper sense of joy and relief.
That little bit of shame and disgust that I saw seeing myself in these dark, secret, shameful, sexual situations that were materially called, with so much emotional pejorative feeling. And I was like, how much are these people living in? How painful for the pure, beautiful person in there to think this is me, and this is me doing this, and this is how I am. And so the only choice I have is to keep doing this and try to hide it. And I saw right there that for these people, the worst punishment actually is simply to be living in that state where they think that's them.
Well, thank you for sharing the testimony. I really appreciate. We are talking about redemption here now, but how that redemption, I will say in your case, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but also how this redemption started by your own self-compassion of choosing not to over-identify with all that, of course, understandably emotional wave of shame and things because of what you went through. But on top of that, having compassion on yourself, which sometimes is not very common term in our Gaudiya glossary, self-compassion.
And so in that same sense, I discovered that that needs to be the work. I show up and I need to be in this state of receptivity and deep listening as I'm sitting with someone who has been broken by life so many times, accompanying them into the depths of their pain, breaking with them, and then in that brokenness, discovering that something that is always there underneath it all, which we would experience as this presence that just kind of arises in our midst. And if we can consent to it so it can begin to live among us, the work of healing is being done. All of a sudden, we find the right words. All of a sudden, the right insights come. But by then, it's not really clear who's helping whom, because the help is coming from somewhere else.
Practice unconditional hearing. It's not like an automatic function. Okay, I will hear now. Now I will talk. Now I will do. I mean, it requires so much training, and it's okay not to discourage anyone. It's good to measure that. To be a good hearer, I mean, that can take a lifetime, and that can be so healing. Hearing can be so healing, but yeah, you need to train your heart and your ear for that to happen.
How we hold our doctrines, it has to do with qualities of the heart like humility and generosity and having a long view as opposed to only a short view of history. And I think part of this flows from a kind of personalism that is aware that we're dealing with human beings. We're dealing with sentient beings who have dignity and their personhood is sacred. Otherwise, even I could imagine, I don't know this is true, but based on the way I've understood what you've experienced in recent years, in defending ideas of personalism, we could treat another human being as less than a person. Oh my goodness. It's humbling, isn't it?
The leaders really don't talk about these things. They're avoided in almost in a cultural way. I mean, sure, you'll have symptoms in the way things are spoken about and the way things are legally dealt with and the way rituals are done. But it's just on a very deep level. Our existence, my whole generation's existence, is not wanted. And so we see over decades of time, you see less and less of us around any of these temple areas, which is really, it's our community and our place that we are born into. But we've been basically scooted out of it in that sense.
Yeah.
And so leadership would be great, right? And I'll recognize some of these leaders as real leaders when they start even at least bringing these, acknowledging the truth and being able to talk about these things.
Deep listening, empathic listening, we're meeting a person with understanding. So when someone is going through an experience, the human experience, which is meant for self-realization, it's designed for self-realization, we're creating this container of listening and confidence where that person is processing what's happening in their human experience for self-realization. So it's not only that person is shining the light of their consciousness on their own self and their process, but also my consciousness, I'm shining my light focused completely onto them and their process and their processing, as that combined light is illuminating for them, and then they can see even more.
We have to turn towards the world, not just with our minds, but with our whole being, and allow the difficulties, the pain, but also the joy and the beauty of the world to shatter us. And I think that once we have that experience, our operating system that normally likes to objectify others, people's pain, and that likes to be in charge of our lives, that cracks. And that's the room for the Spirit of God to, I think, flow into our lives in a new way, to arise in us and begin to lead us into a life of compassionate service, into a life of devotion, into a life of, letting God live through us.
Well, actually, there's no need to see ourselves as something we are not, basically. And there just need to see ourselves as who we are and how we are being accepted and loved already. So I'm mentioning this because this is a crucial point. And of course, the topic of unconditional love is a whole podcast unto itself minimum, but it's quite tied to this idea of redeeming our tradition in the present moment. Because again, unless we look back, acknowledge whatever needs to be acknowledged in the past so we can redeem and improve and upgrade that in the present, there won't be change. And sometimes what gets in the way of that is fear, shame, unwillingness to acknowledge imperfection, because we still have so much ingrained, maybe in our unconscious, this idea of God won't love me unless I am perfect or unless I show myself as such. I think that's an important point for us to understand. Not only that obstacles are in themselves like disguised blessings, but also the importance of those, as you mentioned, to further illuminate the path. No? They are not putting shadow in our progress, but they are shedding light if we have the proper vision. I mean, proper vision, there's, as you mentioned, if there's proper perspective, there are no longer obstacles.
Yeah.
No, the only obstacle was for our lack of proper vision, so to say.
Yes. It's a hard lesson to learn it. Sometimes I feel like we just have to endure for a couple weeks or months or years or even decades sometimes for it to really kind of sink into our bones. But we can always carry the knowing that there are no obstacles. And that everything can be used in this transformative process.
Because art reveals what nature hides, that's the true value. And for me, it's like, well, what is it revealing? What is it hiding? Becomes for me the obsession. And how can my work sort of pull back those veils? But at the same time, I think it's the author and the artist's role to maintain the hiddenness. To both, it's withdrawing, but it's coming forward at the same time. This truth, this beauty.
Yeah, that reminds me what Dietrich Bonhoeffer will say, like the duty of he won't say the artist in this case, he was speaking about theologian, but the duty of the theologian is to keep the mystery as mystery.
My existence is a slice of the whole. I mean, look at it like Om Purnam, we're all parts and parcels, and we're perfect and complete as an individual, as a part of the collective. The whole collective is perfect and complete, but the perfect whole. And I'm a partial reality of the whole reality. My perspective is a partial reality of the whole reality.
Yeah, that's basically what I will define as humility. Now, to acknowledge that fact, basically, to live from that place of not being too sure about anything, which doesn't mean that, I'm losing my faith. It's just, on the contrary, I'm increasing my faith and I'm realizing how reality is ever expanding and how I can just touch one point in an infinite line. And I have to remain open for astonishment and wonder, because as the scriptures say, Rasasar Chamatkar, the essence of the juice of life is wonder, astonishment. I remember one definition of vulnerability from Brené Brown. She says, vulnerability means to have the courage to show up when you don't have any control over the outcome. For me, I can put prayer and then define prayer in that way similarly. Prayer means to have the courage to show up when you have no control over the outcome.
This is a problem because we're losing the capacity for interiority, the ability to be at home with ourselves, to be in silence and not constantly inundated by information. We are enamored by the fact that technology can do something more for us. Now we have Chat GPT, so I don't have to think about writing an essay. I can just go to Chat GPT-4. So we're exporting our minds onto our devices. This actually will have negative consequences. We're actually thinning out the whole frontal cortices of the brain.
Developing this patience and willingness to coexist with those things that are not fully certain yet, and allow their unfolding in us. So I don't know what you can share to us about that in your own experience.
I think you provide such wonderful advice for your listeners on this, because at least the podcast I've seen, you've talked about this, and Certainly, I think we're in full agreement with this. I guess I'm talking about this with my students a lot, that they're in a place of uncertainty in their lives, being freshmen or sophomores or whatever, or they're seniors going off to get a job or go forward, that trying to encourage them to be comfortable in that discomfort, to make friends with it, and surrender, because that's really where we have to be able to surrender. That's the keynote, I think, of this process, surrender.
On one side, we have surrender. You use the term anugatya. So how to harmonize surrender with the idea of being free, no? And the importance of understanding, surrender is voluntary. Surrender is the most voluntary decision. We need the most freedom to choose that we want to surrender, basically, because so many times we associate these terms with something forced, with something that I have no other option, so I do it because if not, this will happen to me. All this type of negative connotations, instead of seeing surrender as the most, hopefully, the most voluntary and joyful decision. I'm choosing to surrender, and I'm taking full responsibility for that with joy.
He said to be chosen is not to be chosen as an elite to the exclusion of everyone else. He said to be chosen is to be chosen in service to the well-being of everyone else.
Responsibility.
Yes.
To feel needed and to know how I can contribute in the immediate to someone else. That's really what a community helps me to get to. And yes, of course, some people in the beginning are so deficient and kind of harassed that they may need a kind of intensive care period where a lot is being given to them without much coming back. But the eventual goal is that.
Thank you for sharing. I totally appreciate your emphasis on care as responsibility, and not only I'm taking responsibility for you, so I'm taking care of you, but I'm taking responsibility for you implies I'm inviting you to take responsibility for you.
My mom will sometimes give the example of like the headlights on a car. And she used to tell us, like, your headlights are small, so you can see a few feet away, but my headlights are big, so I can see a little bit further. And that's who I am as a mom. I can see a few steps ahead what's being called in, and I'll walk with you. It's not enough to say, hey, there's a problem in management, you guys should go figure that out. And there's a problem with, the Guru Institution, you guys should go figure that out. There's a problem with book distribution, you guys should. It's basically saying, I see what's necessary, and I'm going to walk as long as I can and as far as I can with you into that fire. And I'll steady you. I'll steady you by my strength, by my consistency, by my realization, my own embodied humility. I'll walk with you. You can lean on me. I think that's what elder energy feels like to me.
Amen.
To be an expression or a reflection of God's love, in a way, how we conceive of ourselves, even our specialness, that has to die. But when it does, in the process, we discover ourselves to be the most ourselves we've ever been. So I think that is the paradox, because I think many people would see that phrase, dying to self, or what St. John of the Cross talks about, the kind of the dark night experience, where everything that is familiar in a way dissolves. That doesn't mean nothingness. It means that in that experience, it's really our operating system that kind of, dies or is transformed, so we can discover our true aliveness, our true self, our true gift in God.
I can imagine this is the heart of what personalism is supposed to be about, that love is what love becomes the ultimate ethic. And of course, for me as a Christian, I think this is what Jesus was really about. This is what St. Paul was really about. But it's so ironic how a religious tradition, it's such a predictable pattern. They start with a founder and an original insight and gift that's so beautiful. And then we can end up trying to defend the words and argue about concepts. And soon we've betrayed the example.
Carl Jung, he says, in many scriptures, he says, ideology is compensation for a deep faith. If I don't risk myself to really enter the open field, the free field of choosing him, then it's much easier than to grasp to certain ideology. It's a compensation of deep faith. And we always see it tends then to fundamentalism. And actually, it's always a sign of a weakness. It's a person who is not willing to risk, to go on a path, to risk freedom, because it always feels, how to say, secure to be in your cage. And it also, so many religious cage.
And fitting in has more to do with, I stop being who I am, so I fit in. No?
Right.
And belong is, I have to be who I am in order to belong. You follow? If I'm not who I am, I cannot belong. I'm merely fitting in. I'm probably putting up a mask to fit in, to be seen nice, so nobody notices how messy my life is or whatever.
Yes.
And actual true belonging is, I can be who I am with all my imperfection, with all my problems, with all my nakedness, so to say. I can be vulnerable, and I'm being accepted and listened and loved despite that, or even because of that, so to say. So I can feel I belong to that. And again, to that means to that heart, as I like to say. We cannot belong to an institution. We can belong to hearts. Sometimes a heart happens to be beating in an institution, and we end up in an institution because of that heart beating.
Prabhupada's comment, of course, specifically to fear, is that we're afraid of being persons. And therefore, we tend to lean towards an impersonalism, either ontologically, where we want to merge into the impersonal Brahman, or in a more practical impersonalism, we tend to lean into like status quo, which you also mentioned in your book. It's like a leaning towards what the collective is doing. And we're afraid to like stick out in any way, because that could mean our condemnation by the collective audience of our Sangha, of our community, of our institution. And so we're actually afraid to individuate. And so only those who give up such fear, putta ma bhavam agata, being purified by the austerity of knowledge, they can attain a nature like mine, mat bhavam. We can attain that bhava, which is the goal of our spiritual practice, but only after we give up the fear of individuating.
Whatever we don't know, generally we are terrified of, even if it's our brightest potential.
Yes, no, that's absolutely true. And I think that terror of the unknown is the fear of nothingness. I mean, because here we have something, we have our own existence, we have our lives. Maybe they're not the best of what we would hope for, but here they are, and we know them, we're comfortable enough. But being called into the unknown, that future of darkness, but that's where I think faith, do we really have trust in a divine power of love? I think, do we have faith? Faith is that there's no logic, there's no reasoning, but there's an assent that I believe, that this power of love will not let me go.
Some traditions may be officially, outwardly impersonal, but ours is officially personal, radically personal. But sometimes, as you say, in the way we treat each other, we can be inhuman, impersonal, depersonal. So that's such a dangerous combination, I will say, because the packaging sells itself as a certain product, so to say, but you open the packaging and something else is coming, no?
And let me just say, for me, coming from a Christian background, the irony in Christianity is that you can be so un-Christ-like in your defense or promotion of Christian values, and this has happened so many times.
Bad theology is like pornography, which is the imagination of a real relationship without the risk of one. No? To have an idea of something at the distance, but without committing ourselves to a real relationship, without entering the risk space. No? And for me, prayer is a lot about that. No? We may feel the risk, as you mentioned, to show up, to be naked, to be vulnerable, to be seen for what we are, so to say. And again, we are generally so terrified. We love ourselves, so to say, so little. We consider ourselves so damned.
These are legacy burdens. They're these paradigms that they're automatically, we've imbibed them, and they come out of us, and we transmit them generation after generation until somebody says, hey, stop. This is not healthy. We're not doing this anymore. I am going to break this cycle. I'm not letting it go to my children.
Yeah. I think it's so crucial. And I think I will say every generation has the duty of doing that exact same thing, of how to say, appreciating the legacy received from the previous generations, but also knowing which cycles to break or to upgrade, if you will. Every generation has that duty to be honoring the elders and the legacy, but also refining and polishing and continuing upgrading. And even if there's something dysfunctional, learning to break the cycle. Don't be afraid to break the cycle and begin a new one, although it may be challenging because it's creating something sometimes from scratch and having opposition and being treated as a betrayer of the tradition.
What I feel part of our issues as a postmodern devotional community also is that we don't have rituals of containment. We don't have rituals, rites of passage of containment to hold us through the ebbs and flow of the crisis period. And so what's happening to a lot of us is that we're not able to actually, it doesn't matter how much we've heard this message. It's not translating into our minds as an invitation from God, or even a little bit lower, invitation from nature, that it's time to renew. It's time to evolve. It's time to upgrade your interiority.
Because if technology advances to the point of even offering us some level of emotional feedback, if you will, in some way or another, if we are not upgrading our humanity to understand that technology will never be able to provide us actual love, as you mentioned, technology will offer us some sense of flat humanity, so to say, and that will be enough for us because we will be quite flat ourselves. And we won't be able at one point to distinguish between what the robot can offer us in terms of feedback and relationality and what a human can offer. So all the above statements basically speak about the joy there is derived in sharing with one another, the nourishing, the support that we are expected to receive, to provide, the deep relationships, the deep commitment that manifests as a result of those exchanges, of those moments of deep conversation in which God's grace becomes uniquely revealed. If you want an epiphany of God's grace and presence, try to open your heart as much as you can in sacred conversation with like-minded spirits. That's why Sadhu Sangha is so crucial and so emphasized over and over again. It's not a mere formality. It's not a mere external togetherness in quantity, but it's about sharing from a very specific place of quality, which will give a very particular epiphany as a result.